Here's my 30-second story with Guinness. As soon as my sister and I get home for the holidays, we don't even unpack. We head straight to our pub. The bartender already knows our order, Guinness and fries. We laugh all night, catch up with old friends, and walk home with faces sore from smiling. It's one of my favorite nights of the year. That was my 30-second story with Guinness.
Guinness Draft Stout. Please enjoy responsibly. Imported by Diageo Beer Company, USA, New York, New York.
Welcome back to Fine Tuning with Drew Taylor, your one-stop shop when it comes to animation, news, and commentary. I'm entertainment writer Jim Hill, and Mr. Taylor, whose writings on the industry you can regularly read over on The Wrap, and whose musings on the Mission Impossible movies you can still listen to over on Light the Fuse, the official Mission Impossible podcast. Well, Drew isn't here today. I'm recording this show solo on Monday, December 1st, which means that somewhere between Palm Springs and Los Angeles, Mr. Taylor and his lovely bride, Katie, are probably at this very minute driving just a wee bit above the speed limit, largely because Drew needs to be back in town in time to catch one of the very first media screenings for James Cameron's Avatar, Fire and Ash, which doesn't open in theaters officially till December 19th. Hopefully, Drew will be able to talk a wee bit about this 3-hour and 15-minute long movie when he and I regroup next week and record a new fine-tuning then. But as for today's show, it's just me and the cats. Even Nancy's currently out of town. She's just finishing up spending Thanksgiving weekend in Kansas City, where my bride got to attend this year's first Hallmark Christmas experience. And by the way, there'll be more Hallmark Christmas experiences held in Kansas City this year. I guess every weekend between now and December 21st. And yes, there will be Hallmark hunks in attendance. That's largely why Nancy went to this thing, so she could then hang out with her fellow Heinies and bask in the magnificence that is Taylor Hines. Her words, not mine. Anyway, provided that the weather holds, I will be picking Nancy up at the airport sometime before midnight tonight. But in the meantime, I need to get this week's fine-tuning out the door. Lots of animation-related news this week. But before I get to that, I need to acknowledge our sponsor, which is UnlockMagic.com, where you get real discounts on Walt Disney World and Universal Orlando tickets, sometimes upwards of 12% off. And just so you know, UnlockMagic.com is run by the exact same team behind the DVC rental store and the DVC resale market. So just pick your dates, grab your tickets, and go. Unlock Magic makes it that easy to rack up some pretty significant savings. And when you get your tickets, please tell the nice folks at UnlockMagic.com that it was Drew and Jim that sent you. Okay, so about this past weekend's box office. Remember how on last week's show I said the initial box office projections that were out there for Zootopia 2 suggested that this Byron Howard, Jared Bush film might sell 120 million worth of tickets over its opening weekend in North America. But it was then Mr. Taylor who suggested that based on what he was hearing, it was likely that this sequel to the original Zootopia, which was initially released to theaters back in March of 2016, might do better than that. But of course, the real wild card here was how Zootopia was going to do overseas. Disney especially seemed concerned about what was going to happen with the Chinese box office, because evidently the thinking was if Zootopia 2 does well at the Chinese box office, that then gives Disney some idea of how, again, we just talked about it, Avatar, Fire and Ash will do, at the box office when the third film in that James Cameron series is released in China again on December 19th. Well, let's just state the obvious. What Mr. Taylor heard from his sources was, correct. Zootopia did wind up overperforming the domestic box office. It didn't sell just 120 million tickets in North America, but rather 156 million. And as for how this full-length animated feature did overseas, overperforming is putting it mildly. I mean, would you believe 400 million in ticket sales? And the kicker, 275 million of those tickets were sold in China, which makes Zootopia 2 the highest grossing animated foreign film in that country's history. And I want to stress here that over the course of the original Zootopia's run at the Chinese box office, that Richmore, Byron Howard, and then co-directed by Jared Bush film, well, that sold $236 million in tickets. But again, that was over, Zootopia, the original Zootopia's entire theatrical run in China, not its first 5 days in theaters. Now, some Disney insiders suggested they knew this was going to happen, that Zootopia 2 was going to explode at the Chinese box office, largely because of how popular Zootopia Land is at Shanghai Disneyland. That expansion area of the park was the first new land added to the park after Shanghai opened in 2016. And this opened almost 2 years ago now, December 20th, 2023. And there are always long lines for Zootopia Land's signature attraction, which is Zootopia Hot Pursuit, which is an elaborate dark ride featuring trackless vehicles. I have to say, I need now to go check whether Zootopia, the land inside of Shanghai, has the exact same name that the original Zootopia film had when it was released at Chinese theaters back in 2016. And back then, this Richmore Byron Howard film in this specific territory was known as Crazy Animal City. Also want to share a story from veteran Imagineer Jim Schul. Len and I work with Mrs. Schul on our Disney Impact video series over on Patreon. And also want to remind you that Jim Schul has his own channel over at YouTube, Disney Journeys, where every Friday, just like clockwork, Mr. Schul puts up a new video. Anyway, Jim Schul has a theory as to why Zootopia 1 and now Zootopia 2 have turned into such big hits in China. And that's because, well, if you're a person who lives in modern China, Judy Hopps' story is very relatable. By that I mean, Judy grew up out in the countryside in the tiny village of Bunny Burrow. She then, well, after she got a degree or graduated from the police academy, she then did what a lot of young people in China do these days. They then travel to the big city to seek their fortune, to use their skills. And so this is why, at least the way Mr. Schulvey says, when the two Zootopia films play in China, people in the audience look up at the big screen and think, when I look at Judy Hopps, I'm seeing my own story. Oh, and just so you know, Mr. Schul and I are already working on a bonus show for Patreon for the month of December, where we are then going to take a close look at the development of the original Zootopia and then talk about how this film has made its way so far into the Disney parks. Oh, one final interesting little twist in the story. The original Zootopia was so popular in China that at the height of the pandemic, in an effort to lure people back into theaters, the Chinese government reached out to Walt Disney Studios summer of 2020 and asked, could you re-release Zootopia? And the mouse, said yes. So July of 2020. So this is, what is that? March, April, May, June, July. 5 months after the pandemic started, Crazy Animal City returns to Chinese theaters. And even with COVID safety protocols in place, actually does pretty well at the box office. And speaking of working pretty well. Did you see where at Disney's Animal Kingdom, the Clawhauser animatronic inside of Zootopia, Zoobetter Together, the new 4D movie at that theme park, the thing that's being presented in the base of the Tree of Life as a replacement for Tough to Be a Bug. Well, the Clawhauser animatronic is already having operational issues, and I want to remind you that Zootopia, Zoobetter Together only just opened on November 7th. Not to worry, though. On the heels of the Yeti having to switch to B mode just 6 months after Expedition Everest first opened in this same theme park back in April of 2006, the Imagineers now always have a screen-based contingency plan. Just like when the Hondo Onaka and AA breaks down in Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run. Likewise, when the Rocket animatronic malfunctions in the pre-show for Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout at DCA, what they then do is they hide the animatronic, and whatever exposition that character has to share with theme park guests before they move to the actual attraction, that's now shared by a version of that character that shows up on a screen in the pre-show. And so that's what the talented team at Walt Disney Animation Studios, that's what they did with Clawhauser. They animated a version of every moment in Zootopia, Zoobetter Together that covers for if the animatronic version of that overweight cheetah malfunctions or fails to operate. And the screen typically is 2 stage left. By the way, when the Imagineers actually have this meeting at 1410 Flower Street, the one where they then discuss how they're going to cover for a particular moment in an attraction, when the AA figure in the pre-show, malfunctions. This meeting at Imagineering is now officially known, at least in-house, as the Yeti meeting. Because, again, these days there must always be contingency plans. Much the same way that we always have to stop, on this podcast from time to time to sneak in a word for our sponsors. And I'll be back in a sec after this ad to discuss some more animation-related news. But first, this...
Hello, I'm Chris Cox. Sorry for interrupting your regularly scheduled adverts, but I wanted to tell you about the new Jim Hill Media Network podcast, The Case For with Chris Cox. That's me, by the way. Each week, myself, Len Tester, together we debate the case for all sorts of things Disney and sometimes Universal resorts in front of our very own judge, Jim Hill. Hi, Jim.
Hi, Chris.
No, you're a judge. Be more judge-like.
Hello there.
Nailed it. You've got such range, Jim. Right, and we have this week released a very special episode all about butterbeer.
Yeah, and how you can get into a sugar coma in, 2 glasses or less?
Very much less in my world. So go and download it wherever you downloaded this podcast. Search for The Case For with Chris Cox and get it in your ears.
Disney's Lilo & Stitch has finally landed on Disney+. Now you can watch the global phenomenon at home with your Ohana.
Be good for 1 second.
Lilo & Stitch is verified hot on Rotten Tomatoes with an audience score of 93%.
Perfect.
Stitch is also cute and fluffy.
Disney's Lilo & Stitch, rated PG, now streaming on Disney+. And right now, you can get Disney+, Hulu, and all of ESPN with an incredible limited-time offer. Terms apply.
Does it ever feel like you're a marketing professional just speaking into the void? But with LinkedIn ads, you can know you're reaching the right decision makers, a network of 130 million of them, in fact. You can even target buyers by job title, industry, company, seniority, skills, and did I say job title? See how you can avoid the void and reach the right buyers with LinkedIn ads. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a free $250 credit for the next one. Get started at linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
All right, listen up, nacho chips. Quiet down, crispy potatoes. This is the moment Velveeta's been preparing you for, and you're not about to crack under pressure. Today's the day to go all in on the drip. Velveeta's Heat and Eat Queso is the MVP of any game day spread, so stick by them, and you'll be golden. Now get out there and make delicious history. No tailgate party is complete without Velveeta.
And we're back. And by the way, folks, again, we try to stay ridiculously current with this podcast. And this piece of news just broke this afternoon. Again, this is Monday, December 1st, 2025, as I was writing this week's episode of Fine Tuning. And Plimptunes, the home studio of animation master Bill Plympton, they've just started a TikTok page. And to get things started with a bang over there, they've taken his 1989 film, How to Quit Smoking, and gone into that short and broken it down to its component gags and are now posting those one by one on TikTok. And by the way, the Plimptunes TikTok page will also include some major studio updates. And also, if you are looking for something special to get the animation fan on your holiday shopping list, and you happen to be heading to New York City like next weekend, December 12th through the 14th, Plimptunes will be allowing the public to come by their studio in Chelsea for Plimptunes' annual studio art sale. We're talking original artwork, cells, drawings, and backgrounds that were used in the making of many classic Bill Plympton films, but now for just half price. By the way, that studio is located at 151 West 30th Street in New York City, and this is an in-person sale, folks. So, this doesn't apply to their online store. And when you get to 151 West 30th Street, you want to seek out store 405. And again, the hours for this studio art sale: Friday, December 12th, from noon to 6 p.m., Saturday, December 13th, and Sunday, December 14th, 12 noon to 5 p.m. Okay, and as we keep reminding you here at Fine Tuning, awards season is now well underway out west, and Mr. Taylor recently talked about moderating a panel where several animated shorts that were in contention for this year's Best Animated Shorts Oscar were screened. And now, mind you don't need to go out west and be in the know to see these things. I mean, Locksmith Animation, the folks behind Ron's Gone Wrong and last year's wonderful animated holiday film for Netflix, That Christmas, they have a terrific new short out right now that's called Cardboard. And I got to tell you, folks, this is a flat-out wonderful little movie about a daddy pig with his two little boys who are, in essence, starting their lives over after the loss of the boy's mom. And the family finds itself moving to a pretty grubby-looking trailer park out in the desert somewhere, and while Daddy Pig struggles to unpack the car and transform this beaten-up trailer into a new home for his boys, Daddy Pig's sons use their imagination to turn a simple cardboard box into something that they can then use to explore their new environment. And look, if I say more, it's going to spoil Cardboard, but that said, I'm still going to recommend that you seek out this new short from Locksmith Animation. It is sweet, it is heartfelt, and it has a wonderful message about living in the moment, actually being there for your kids, which I think every dad needs to hear. Okay, so I loved Cardboard from Locksmith Animation. And I wish I could say the same about Prep and Landing, the Snowball Protocol, the third installment of this series of holiday specials. And just to remind you, the original Prep and Landing came out December of 2009, produced by Walt Disney Animation Studios, created and directed by Kevin Dieters and Stevie Wormer-Skelton. Hugely popular. Deservedly took home 4 Primetime Emmys, including that year's award for Outstanding Animated Program for programming less than an hour. This was followed by a prep and landing short, Operation Secret Santa, that premiered on ABC for the 2010 holiday season. Very next year, 2011, we got another full-sized holiday special, Prep and Landing Naughty vs. Nice, which was nominated for 2 Primetime Emmys. It didn't win anything. And right after that, there was, in fact, talk of a third Prep and Landing holiday special, and this persisted for years. But in the interim, we got Jingle Bell, Jingle Bam, which is that seasonal projection show that plays on the exterior of the Chinese Theater at Disney's Hollywood Studios. It's done so most every holiday season since 2016. So finally, this year, we get Prep and Landing, the Snowball Protocol, which, if we're being completely honest here, is just 2 Prep and Landing shorts, something akin to Operation Secret Santa, that they were then bumped out to a half-hour-long playing time, just like the other previous Prep and Landing holiday specials, with some additional material. Which is not to say that's bad. Look, I always enjoy spending time with Wayne, Lanny, and McGee, and learning more about the world of Prep and Landing. But I'm gonna look. I'd be lying if I said the Snowball Protocol was just as entertaining as the original Prep and Landing or its sequel, Naughty vs. Nice. Snowball Protocol is fine, serviceable. Look, maybe it's me. I mean, it's been 14 years since the last Prep and Landing sequel, and maybe I built up my hopes too high. I wanted something that was as great as the original Prep and Landing, and Snowball Protocol just doesn't come close. That said, the folks who worked on this holiday special for Disney Television Animation, not Walt Disney Animation Studios, they still did a great job with the animation side of things. And I'm not going to lie, I would still love to get my hands on a Nog the Seal Pup plush, complete my collection of Prep and Landing, plush. But, all right. In other holiday-related news, we have talked on previous editions of this podcast about David, that new faith-based animated musical that's debuting in theaters on the exact same day as Avatar, Fire and Ash, which we keep mentioning, December 19th. Drew and I originally talked about how Angel Studios is reporting that they've already sold $3 million worth of tickets for David. Well, enthusiasm evidently continues to build for this faith-based animated musical. For Angel Studios now reporting that even more theaters around North America are booking screenings of David. Pre-sales of this film have doubled since we last reported on the project, 6 million versus 3 million. Not to mention that this animated musical has also been pre-sold in 43 international territories. And Angel Studios continues to cleverly promote David out ahead of its release in the States, again, December 19th. For example, they just began posting music videos of some of the songs from the film. Good-looking, professionally made videos. You can find these 2 numbers, the adventure song and Follow the Light, on Angel Studios' official YouTube channel. And gotta say, this is, a tough time to be bringing this sort of entertainment into the marketplace, but Angel Studios seems confident that David will have legs at the domestic box office, so much so that they've scheduled the sing-along version of this faith-based animated musical to arrive in theaters 2 weeks after its domestic debut. So it will be interesting to see how David ultimately does at the North American box office. And we could say the same thing for Wicked for Good, now in its second week in theaters. Domestic ticket sales for the second part of this film version of the Wicked Broadway musical currently sit at 270 million. Overseas ticket sales to date are 122 million. So worldwide box office just shy of 400 million, 393 million to be exact, which is more than half of what the original Wicked made last year, 2024, during its 16-week-long run in theaters. So again, that's $253 million versus, again, For Good, $393 million. And to be at that number, $393 million, just 9 days into your theatrical run, you just know the folks up in the Black Tower there at Universal Studios Hollywood have to be pleased the way things are trending ticket sales wise for Wicked for Good. And speaking of Oz-related stories, there's an animated version of this movie that almost got made in the 30s by a certain Walt Disney. But we'll get to that story in a sec. But first, this.
Hello, I'm Diane Morgan. If you know who I am, you know who I am. If you don't, who cares? I'm here to explain Italian Time, a holiday phenomenon where Italians throw away their clocks and gather for eternity with San Pellegrino. I've been at this party so long that I've eaten 5 courses, hugged someone's grandma twice, and been offered a job in the family restaurant. So this holiday season, make sure to bring enough San Pellegrino to last you through the meal, the after meal, and the entire goodbye ritual. San Pellegrino, holiday on Italian Time.
This episode is brought to you by McAfee.
Swimsuit, passport, phone, with VPN activated.
VPN?
Cell phone service is going to be spotty on vacation, so we'll be using public Wi-Fi.
Sounds sketchy.
Exactly. The networks can leave your personal info, like credit card numbers, exposed to hackers.
McAfee's secure VPN lets you browse and bank safely from wherever, whenever. Learn more at McAfee.com/online protection.
While the Who's of Whoville were laughing and eating, the Grinch from his lair sought to wreak havoc on their season. He thought, how do I ruin their holiday meals? A plan sprang to mind, which he enacted with zeal. Dill pickle seasoning on fries will make for a green surprise, and I know they'll be shocked with these loathsome odd socks. So if you want to experience the Grinch's mischievous meal, head to McDonald's and show him how you really feel. The new Grinch meal, now at McDonald's. At participating McDonald's while supplies last. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
And we're back. Okay, over this past weekend, the long Thanksgiving Day weekend, I noticed that TBS and TNT were running the original Wizard of Oz, that MGM production that was first released to theaters back in August of 1939. They were running it a lot, sometimes screening it back to back multiple times in a single night, which, given that Wicked for Good is out in theaters, and, the second installment of this film does, in fact, deal with Dorothy's arrival in Oz and what happens to Elphaba after that, I gotta say, this was smart programming on these cable channels' part. Now, what's kind of interesting about the MGM version of Wizard of Oz is that studio only made this elaborate live-action musical fantasy because Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which, again, premiered in Hollywood December of 37 and then went into wide release February of 38, had made so much damn money. Now, kind of interesting little bend on the story. So Walt, as a follow-up to Snow White, is looking, all right, what other films can we make? And he seriously considered making an animated version of The Wizard of Oz. And so he began to inquire, this favorite book of his, began inquiring around Hollywood who held the film rights to this L. Frank Baum book. And at that time, we're talking late winter, early spring of 1938. Well, it was Samuel Goldwyn who held the film rights for that book. He bought them from L. Frank's widow, Maud Gage Baum. She had sold Goldwyn the film rights to The Wizard of Oz back in 1934 for $40,000. And Samuel bought the film rights to this book because he envisioned Goldwyn Studios making an elaborate movie musical version of The Wizard of Oz that would then be a starring vehicle for Ziegfeld's Folly star, Eddie Cantor. But then Alibaba Goes to Town, which was this elaborate musical fantasy that Goldwyn had built around Cantor, which then had this musical comedy star imagining that he was now back in the days of the Arabian Nights and was serving as an advisor to the Sultan. That comes out October of 1937 and tanks at the box office. And on the heels of that, Goldwyn, well, he abandons his idea of turning The Wizard of Oz into a starring vehicle for Eddie Cantor. More to the point, Samuel lets other moguls out in Hollywood know that the film rights to The Wizard of Oz are now coming up for bid. They'll soon be available. And especially interesting here, by the late 1930s, Walt Disney and Samuel Goldwyn had been creeping toward a collaboration. Back in 1936, Goldwyn had registered the title of a film he wanted to make at his studio, The Life of Hans Christian Andersen, whereas in 1939, Walt registers two titles for a very similar sort of movie that he wanted to make. The two titles were The Story of Hans Christian Andersen, and the other was The Tales of Hans Christian Andersen. And by the way, by March of 1940, Goldwyn and Disney are now in active conversation about this Hans Christian Andersen biopic that these two studios may be making together, with the idea that it would be Samuel's people who handled the live action end of things, and Walt's staff would then, well, they'd create the animation portion of this motion picture, which would then recreate some of Andersen's most famous stories, The Little Mermaid, The Brave Tin Soldier, and The Poor Little Match Girl. But again, that's in far off 1940s, and we're back now in the late winter, early spring of 1938, which is when Walt learns the hard way that if you snooze, you lose. Because before Disney Studios could even make an offer to Samuel Goldwyn about acquiring the movie rights to The Wizard of Oz, MGM swoops in that same window of time and acquires the film rights to this project for $75,000. It allows Samuel to make a $35,000 profit on the project. And this galls Walt quite a bit. I mean, as much as he liked MGM's live-action version of The Wizard of Oz, which, by the way, features a vocal cameo by Adriana Casoletti, the official voice of Snow White in the Disney animated film. You can hear her. You can hear her in the movie. Adriana, it's in when the Tin Woodsman is singing "If I Only Had a Heart." Miss Casoletti is the off-screen performer in that number who sings "Wherefore art thou, Romeo?" But that said, Walt still felt that Disney Studios, if they had made an animated version of The Wizard of Oz, it would have been a better movie than the one that MGM made. And Walt, he doesn't let go of this idea. In fact, right after Walt signs that deal with ABC in March of 1954, where in exchange for the money necessary to fund the initial phase of Disneyland's construction, Walt agrees to produce a weekly television series for that TV network. Well, Walt then begins acquiring the movie and television rights to 11 other Oz books that L. Frank Baum wrote. These include The Emerald City of Oz, Glinda of Oz, The Lost Princess of Oz, The Magic of Oz, Ozma of Oz, The Patchwork Girl of Oz, Rinky Tink of Oz, The Road to Oz, The Scarecrow of Oz, Tick Tock of Oz, and finally, The Tin Woodsman of Oz. In fact, he got all of the books except The Wizard of Oz. And by the way, at that time, Walt wasn't thinking about bringing Oz back to the big screen, but rather he wanted to use some of the Baum books as possible fodder for episodes of this new ABC television series, Disneyland. In fact, toward that end, he hires TV writer Dorothy Cooper to adapt the Patchwork Girl of Oz to the small screen. And April of 1957, Ms. Cooper turns in an outline for a proposed 2-part episode of the Disneyland TV show. Initial title was Dorothy Returns to Oz. But by August of that same year, 57, when Dorothy turns in her now fleshed out version of that teleplay, the project has a new name, The Rainbow Road to Oz. So Walt reads Dorothy's teleplay and likes it quite a bit. In fact, Walt likes the script so much that he takes The Rainbow Road to Oz off of the studio's television development track and moves it over to the feature side of his studio. More to the point, the studio's publicity department, they start talking this up. Press releases are sent out to the trades announcing that Walt Disney Production will begin shooting The Rainbow Road to Oz in November of that very same year, 1957. It's going to be a multi-million-dollar live-action musical to be directed by Sidney Miller and produced by Bill Walsh, who, by the way, both of these guys at this point are playing huge roles in the day-to-day production of the Mickey Mouse Club. And speaking of the Mickey Mouse Club, guess who's supposed to fill most of the major roles in this motion picture? Yep, the Musketeers. Late summer, early fall of 57. Rainbow Road to Oz seems like it's a sure thing. In fact, so much so, a 15-minute long segment of the season opener of the Disneyland TV show, this was the start of the 4th season of the show on ABC, is devoted to this upcoming motion picture, with the conceit that the Musketeers are trying to sell Walt on the idea of, hey, we should make this L. Frank Baum book into a movie. This is why Annette and Doreen and Darlene and Bobby Burgess are all in costume and appearing in proposed musical numbers, for this movie. But it's Walt, rather than the Musketeers, who's really, really pushing for this project to happen. And in fact, what's interesting is during this same time, Walt continues to acquire L. Frank Baum books. In fact, he buys a 12th book at this point, Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. By the way, he evidently spends the same amount to just get this one book that he spent to acquire the movie rights to the other 11 L. Frank Baum books. But this is where it gets interesting. The previously announced start of production, November of 57, came and went. And by February of 58, rumors are now circulating that Disney has abandoned its plans to make the Rainbow Road to Oz. So what's behind Walt tabling the project? Truth be told, the MGM version of The Wizard of Oz, again, the one from 39, had just aired on CBS as part of an episode of the Ford Star Jubilee anthology series. This happened back on November 3rd, 1956, and when the overnight ratings came in, CBS executives were astounded to see that 45 million people had tuned in. By the way, ratings-wise, that translates to a 53 share. Which means more than half of the television sets in America at that time were tuned in to watch MGM's version of The Wizard of Oz, which did not go unnoticed by Walt Disney, especially when a reporter at Variety, who wrote an article about this rating smash the following day, suggested that CBS should do the smart thing and begin airing MGM's Wizard of Oz on an annual basis as a holiday treat. That would eventually happen. Now, mind you, it takes a few years. MGM's Wizard of Oz did not re-air on CBS in 57 or 58. And this was largely because, CBS had paid $225,000 for the broadcast rights to this motion picture. Now MGM had initially wanted $250,000, but CBS's lawyers negotiated them down. And so now, after that airing of The Wizard of Oz on Ford Star Jubilee Theater was such a rating smash, CBS goes back and wants to negotiate a deal that will give this television network the broadcast rights, for The Wizard of Oz on an annual basis. And Well, here's the thing. At this point, MGM holds all the cards and wants a far better deal this time around. And it would take 2 years for these two giant entertainment companies to come to terms, which is why The Wizard of Oz wasn't broadcast for a second time on CBS till 1959. In fact, on December 13th, 1959. And this time around, CBS agreed to pay MGM $450,000 for the rights to air The Wizard of Oz twice on their television network, once in 59 and once in 1960, and then there was language in the deal for a third and fourth screening in 61 and 62, but should CBS exercise that option, they would have to agree to pay MGM an additional $450,000. And, well, they did that. In fact, truth be told, The Wizard of Oz ran on CBS annually from 1959 through 1968, and thus became a broadcast tradition for a generation of baby boomers, myself included. That is actually one of the main reasons that this MGM film is so beloved today. And now, back to Walt Disney. He saw all too well that his Rainbow Road to Oz would, rightly or wrongly, be compared to MGM's Wizard of Oz, which was produced again back in 38, 39, back when MGM and its star-making machine was operating at full steam. And Walt knew that Rainbow Road to Oz, even with the cool animated scenes he had planned for this project, just wouldn't be able to compete with the 39 film, which is why he then began to seek out a replacement for this proposed production, which then turned out to be Disney's live-action version of Victor Herbert's comic operetta, Babes in Toyland. And by the way, later on this month, we'll be discussing at length over on Disney Impact why this particular live-action musical, Babes in Toyland, missed the mark, but then blazed the trail for what many consider to be Walt Disney's crowning achievement, which is the Academy Award-winning movie musical, Mary Poppins. But when Drew and I do next week's fine-tuning together, we'll continue the story of The Wizard of Oz, especially the animated versions of this L. Frank Baum that bubbled up in the 60s and 70s, including one project that Chuck Jones, one of the resident geniuses at Warner Brothers Termite Terrorists, had a hand in. So come by next week and we'll continue this tale of animated journeys to Oz. And also come back next week because my partner in crime, Drew Taylor, will be back in the saddle and, like I said, may be able to share a little of what he saw when he went to that press screening of Avatar, Fire and Ash. And by the way, if you're missing Drew's voice, well, you can always listen to Light Diffuse, which is the official Mission Impossible podcast that Drew did with Charles Hood. There are nearly 300 episodes in this show's archive, and each one of them is loaded with all sorts of amazing behind-the-scenes stories about the film industry. Mind you, I'm kind of hoping you're able to say the same thing when you listen to some of the other podcasts we post here at Jim Hill Media, that you'll hear some amazing stories, and those shows include Disney Dish with Len Testa, the Epic Universal podcast I do with Eric Hersey, talented gentleman who produces a lot of the shows here. Likewise, I Want That Too. That's the Disney Merch podcast I do with Eric's lovely bride, Lauren. Also want to remind you of Manufacturing the Magic. That's the themed entertainment history podcast we host here. That's produced by Noah and Shali Valladolid. Brand new episode of that will be posted this coming Saturday, December 6th. Likewise, The Case 4 with Chris Cox. There's a brand new episode of that podcast being posted tomorrow, Wednesday, December 3rd. Chris and I discuss the history of butterbeer at the parks. And as for Disney Impact, which again is what Mr. Test and I do over on Patreon, the show video series we do with a veteran Imagineer Jim Schul, we got a new episode of that coming up where Len, Jim Schul, and I walk around Disney's Animal Kingdom and eyeball all of the new construction that's going on there. All right. As we wrap up this show today, I want to thank Eric Hersey and David Gray for the great job they do when it comes to the editing and production side of this podcast. I also have a quick favor to ask of you folks. If you could please head on over to Apple Podcasts and rate and review the show as well as Light Diffuse. That'd be cool. I guess I should also mention social media as we head out the door here. You can find Drew. He goes by the handle Drew Tailored, like a tailor shirt. And that's X, Instagram, I want to say Blue Sky. As for me, you can find me on X and Instagram as Jim Hill Media, and then over on Facebook as Jim Hill Media News. All right, and that's it for this week, folks. Here's hoping you all had a very happy Thanksgiving. And on behalf of Mr. Taylor, thank you for listening to this week's Fine Tuning. And he and I will be back soon.